Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Nickenick, and I hope that you're all doing well during these difficult times and staying safe. Today, I will be discussing my research paper topic with all of you. The sculptural work that I have chosen is the work by Salvador Dali, which is titled Retrospective Bust of a Woman from 1933. In this presentation, which I've titled Retrospective Bust of a Woman, the work of Salvador Dali, I discuss the surrealist fantasy that Dali has created through his use of found objects in the aid of creating a dreamlike figure. By using objects such as bread as a phallic and the bust of a woman, as well as other materials, he is focusing on sexuality and the idea of mass consumption, bringing up the topic of women being viewed as food or as something that is able to be consumed. Surrealism was a 20th century cultural movement which was developed in Europe from the 1920s to the 1950s, following the Dada movement, who were one of their biggest influences. The term was coined in 1917 by the French poet Guillaume Apollinaire. Andre Breton created the Surrealist group in 1924, citing the term in the Manifesto of Surrealism as being pure psychic automatism. The Surrealists created artworks that depicted a dreamlike unconscious state of mind in both painting and sculpture, whereas their sculptural works were considered dreamlike objects. The Surrealist object, or dream object as it was called, opened up tantalizing outlooks of fashion, design, and manufacturers. They used found or cheaply bought objects to create their assemblages, which was influenced by Marcel Duchamp's ready-mades. More surrealist artists began to create sculptural works around the 1930s to challenge reason and create surreal fantasies, objects that were a representation of the unconscious act. Andre Breton quoted, saying, "To aid the systematic derangement of all the senses, it is my opinion that we must not hesitate to bewilder sensation." Marcel Duchamp created his first ready-made, which was titled "The Bicycle Wheel" in 1913, where he took a bicycle wheel and placed it upside down on a wooden stool. This sculpture was created using found objects, which he called ready-mades. Duchamp's use of found material created a new meaning for the object. By taking objects that were seen as used every day or mass-produced, he created a new meaning for them by putting them in a new environment. This was appealing to the surrealist artist. A quote by Duchamp, which states, "Since the tubes of paint used by the artist are manufactured and ready-made products, we must conclude that all the paintings in the world are ready-mades, aided and also works of assemblage." Salvador Dali was born in 1904 in a small town outside of Barcelona, Spain. He joined the Surrealist movement in 1929 and moved to Paris following his admission into the group. Dali was focused on revealing the unconscious mind in his works, which were achieved in his paintings through his dreamlike worlds that he created. He focused on topics such as sexuality, taking a liking to Sigmund Freud's theories. Dali was quoted stating, "It speaks with the vocabulary of the great vital constants: sexual instinct, feeling of death, physical notion of the enigma of space. These vital constants are visually echoed in every human." In Salvador Dali's sculptural work titled Retrospective Bust of a Woman from 1933, we see the bust of a woman whose gaze is directed towards the viewer, as though she is aware of our gaze right back at her. The torso of the bust is made of porcelain, while the head was taken from a display mannequin, which may have been used to display hats or scarves. This is Dali's way of parodying the fashion of Paris at the time, as well as his use of dried-eared corns in place of a woman's scarf around the figure's neck. Also around the neck of the bust, we see a strip of paper which displays dancing figures on it. This was taken from a 19th century child's toy, which was called a zoetrope. This toy included printed cartoon images of dancing boys. This further adds to the playful and comical aspects in Dali's work, as well as creates movement within the still object with the dancing figures. On the face of the figure is a swarm of ants crawling over her head. Dali often used ants in many of his works as a symbol of death and decay, which in this work can be interpreted as the decay of beauty that comes with age. Around the head of the woman's head, she is wearing a feathered skull cap, which were popular with women in the 1920s. On top of the figure's head is a large, long loaf of bread. This phallic-like shape adds to the sexualization of women by men, which also adds an aspect of eroticism to his work. On top of the bread is an ink weld which was embedded in bronze, with the peasant figures from Jean-François Millet's oil painting from 1885, titled The Angelus. Dali's sculpture can be seen as a metaphor for the consumption of the female image. On this slide, we see details of the objects on the figure. First is the ear of dried corn around her neck, which was used as a symbol of the stole that women would wear. Next, we see a close-up of the strip of paper with the cartoon dancing figures on it. As we can see, each has a different movement, as though it is the same figure dancing around. One even seems to have his head off, adding to the comical, playful aspect of Dali's work. The next, we see the phallic-shaped bread on top of the woman's head, which was also often used in many of Dali's works as a symbol of sexuality. On this slide, we see a detailed close-up of the swarm of ants on the figure's face. We also can see a beaded detail on the feather cap, which we may not have seen in other photos. As we can see, the swarm of ants are painted on, crawling along the woman's ears, eyes, mouth, and on the side of her temple. We still see the woman as having porcelain skin with rosy cheeks and lips. These ants can be a symbol of the decay of beauty to come with age later in life. Here we see a comparison of the oil painting done by Jean-François Millet and Salvador Dali's inkweld from the retrospective bust of a woman. The oil painting by Millet displays a peasant couple in the potato fields, stopping to recite the prayer of the Angelus. The Angelus is the prayer that commemorated the Annunciation made to Mary by the angel Gabriel. Millet is quoted in 1865, stating, "The idea for the Angelus came to me because I remembered that my grandmother, hearing the church bell ringing while we were working in the fields, always had to stop to work to say the Angelus prayer for the poor departed. End quote. Dolly did not see this as a moment of prayer, but rather a scene of mourning, which further adds to the decay and mortality of his artwork. Food became an important aspect in the work of Salvador Dali as a symbol of mass consumption. Bread, in particular, became known as the Dali brand. He is quoted in 1945 stating, quote, "Bread has always been one of the oldest fetishistic and obsessive subjects in my work, the one to which I have remained the most faithful." End quote. Dali has written about this epiphany of bread that he has had after a satisfying meal, stating, "I have eaten my fill, was looking absent-mindedly, though fixedly, at a piece of bread. It was the heel of a long loaf, lying on its belly, and I could not cease looking at it. Finally, I took it and kissed the very tip of it. Then, with my tongue, I sucked it a little to soften it, after which I stuck the softened part on the table, where it remained standing." He continues, stating, "Just reinvented Columbus's egg, the bread of Salvador Dali. I had just discovered the enigma of bread. It could stand up without having been eaten. This thing so atavistically and consubstantially welded to the idea of primary utility. The elementary basis of continuity, the symbol of nutrition, of sacred substance, this thing I was going to render useless and aesthetic." During 1933, when Salvador Dali created his work, The Retrospective Bust of a Woman, most of his writings were dominated by metaphors that related to eating, devouring, and hunger. This can be equated to the sexual act of Freudians with eating. Salvador Dali often mentioned cannibalism. This can be seen in his work by devouring the female image. Freud and Dali met in June of 1938, and Sigmund Freud had told Dali, quote, "What interests me in your art is not the unconscious, but the conscience." End quote. In conclusion, the sculptural work by Salvador Dali, titled The Retrospective Bust of a Woman from 1933, can be seen as a symbol of the consumption of the female image. This is present in his use of food in the object to represent women as food for the viewer to consume. Salvador Dali also uses other symbols of human nature in his work, such as a scene of mourning to represent mortality, ants crawling over the face of a beautiful woman to represent the decay of beauty, and a large phallic-like shape on the top of the female head to represent sexuality and human nature. All of these aspects combined create a work that shows the world that the female image is not something that can be consumed.